for TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jarod Duggins, and this is the Careers in Cannabis podcast. On this show, we sit down with staffing agencies, cannabis companies, and other industry professionals to discuss employment opportunities in the burgeoning cannabis industry. Ranging from being an advisor to the Securities Exchange Commission to working with two of the big four as it pertains to CPA firms and a couple regional firms in between, our guest brings a very unique background and consequently a very unique perspective and skill set. We learn how she found her path into the cannabis industry and why she chose to pursue her career in cannabis, and how she won the Best Accountant at the California Cannabis Awards almost right away. Today we are joined by Sonia Luna, founder of Aviva Spectrum, a California cannabis-related business CPA firm. Sonia, welcome to the show.
Thank you for having me. It's such a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure's ours. As we do with all of our guests, I'd like to check in. It's with all the calamities around and the global pandemics and the time period we're all going through, I'd like to check in with how you're doing personally and where you're at in the world.
Thank God I'm fine. We have two boys, 9 and 7, and they're doing great considering what's going on outside. The fires, we've seen our fair share of dust particles and ash accumulating, but thankfully it hasn't hit our house or anything like that. We're in Los Angeles. And so right now, the biggest issue we're facing is just the air quality, but we have ways of dealing with it in the house, but thank God we're all safe here.
Well, that's fortunate, and glad you guys are all safe over there, because everyone's having to deal with this looming smoke and horrible air quality over here on the West Coast. So glad you're doing well indoors, even though we're kind of all relegated to being indoors right now anyway. So glad you're doing well.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Yeah. And so that, we're here today to talk about careers in cannabis, and your background and past is one that would probably be, not associated with the industry or, what was before the industry here in cannabis, because, ledgers and keeping track of books was really aligned with evidence, if you will. So nowadays, with taxes being taken out and the legal market prevailing, is ultimately there's the need for bookkeepers, CPAs, and strategies to keeping more of your money in pocket. You've had a background that includes being an SEC advisor, working for a couple of the big fours when it comes to accounting firms. Can you tell a little bit about your background and how you aligned with cannabis? Sure,
I'd love to. Thank you for that softball that you just threw at me. I'm going to hit it out of the park here. No. I am what people would call your traditional path accountant. And let me be more specific. In college, they brainwashed you and they said that in order for you to be a CPA in California, because after all, you took accounting course and you went the accounting route, you have to be a CPA. So that's number one. Number two, the rules had so many restrictions of how to become a CPA that you needed to get what's called audit hours. And the best way to get them was certain firms were so large enough that you were guaranteed basically your first year, you would get all of your audit hours, right? That you needed in order to get signed off, that you had this quote unquote experience to be a CPA. So I did that, and I was very fortunate to go to, back then it was the largest CPA firm in the world, Arthur Andersen, worked in downtown, and did a ton of traveling. I did enjoy it, but it was getting a little rough for me to come back home and just do a load of laundry and literally go on a plane the next day. I was fortunate enough to stumble upon a wonderful regional firm called Singer Lewak, and that's when my depth and experience in a wide variety of different industries blew up. I had no clue how wonderful working with a regional CPA firm like that provided me such a big, huge, deep foundation in technical accounting treatments in a huge array of industries. When you go to a bigger firm, your career is really predicated on, okay, what do you think you like, right? So I did entertainment and I in hospitality, so hotels and other post-production type companies. At a smaller firm, your career is whatever's available and the client base of the various partners. So I conducted audits of nonprofits, audits of technology companies, manufacturing clients, you follow. So it was a wide variety, and they were always short, meaning they never lasted more than 2 or 3 months. So you would be on 2 or 3 different engagements, and it could be completely different companies that you were looking at. Not to mention, this is before Sarbanes-Oxley Act had happened. So back then, your career could be impacted because you could help the client book the journal entry, like literally show them the model you used and then provide them the support. Now you can't do that. The client has to figure it out on their own. You audit the work, and then if there's a difference between your work and their work, there's a conversation about what's right to book it. So that career was wonderful, working at a regional firm. And then I got recruited back to the Big Four again. And I was a manager there at Ernst & Young, had a great time there. And then Sarbanes-Oxley hit. Why? Because we had the 2000 crash, and in 2002, President Bush signed into law stating that, hey, if you're a public company, you need to check on your controls. And at that point, I was selling work at Ernst & Young. And I thought, why don't I try going out on my own? I sold services with obviously a partner, but I didn't know if I could do it alone and gain the trust from prospective clients. And I also didn't know if my depth of network would allow me to do that. And it's now been 16 years and some odd months, and I've been on my own and I haven't looked back. So this career has afforded me a lot of flexibility. That would be like my number one thing I would say to a student or anybody going into accounting is by far one of the most flexible careers you could ever ask for. And how I got into the cannabis industry, while I was, providing services to publicly traded companies, conducting internal audits for them, my work got noticed. Whenever I flew to Washington, D.C., I would participate in a meeting that was held annually, covering smaller company issues. And that was my client base. So I would go and advocate on their behalf, and also just understand what the Securities Exchange Commission was contemplating at the time in terms of changes or rules and regulations that they wanted to impact the smaller business environment, if you will. And I got recruited to be an advisor to the Securities Exchange Commission. When I got that call, I thought it was a joke. When you get a call like, "Hi, this is so-and-so from the Securities Exchange Commission." And I thought, oh man, this is a good friend who's playing a big joke on me. And I'm like, what? Are you serious? And then I thought, oh my God, maybe I'm in trouble, right? Then it was like this fear. He's like, no, we're from this office. And he kind of explained, how my name popped up and if I would consider being an advisor. And of course, I jumped at the opportunity. And I was an advisor for a little over a year, and would fly to DC to advocate on behalf of the smaller public companies. And my lens at those meetings was from the lens of an accountant / auditor, right? So I could add that perspective to the group. I think we did some wonderful work. We wrote some fabulous written recommendations to the chair of the SEC. Some of them have actually been implemented, to help the smaller business community that is publicly traded. Now, back to cannabis. How did I get into it? I had a very dear friend who's still a very good friend today. He's a securities attorney. Sometimes I'd go to these meetings, and we had the agenda a few weeks beforehand. And I would call my buddy Mark, and I'm like, Mark, this is referencing some regulatory language. Can you just give me the layperson's view on this? And how does it impact smaller public companies from your perspective, right? So I just wanted his perspective to understand how the legal mind views it. And then obviously I would take the accounting. So I would get beforehand, I just felt a little bit more prepared. He had a cannabis client. So during those conversations, imagine I'm touching base with him every quarter or what have you.
Right.
He had a client that had a few stores, cannabis retail stores, and the question arose with the owner, is this operator sufficiently guarding the assets of the business, right? Inventory, cash, etc. Took a look at some of the items, showed some gaps, not only on just basic checks and balances, right? Did someone check this work? Did someone double check this other thing? And, who gets access to this? And not only were there apparent gaps between the operations of the business, right? Like control gaps. There were also gaps in some of the numbers that just didn't make sense. So at that point, the operator was terminated, and a new operator needed to come in, right? And at that point, Mark said to me, he's like, wow, you can distill very complicated things in a very easy to understand fashion with great recommendations that are practical. I think that's the key word that sticks with me throughout my career, is practical. And Mark had asked me to take a look at cannabis companies. I did my own SWOT analysis in 2017, found out that California is a huge, ginormous market for cannabis that I had no idea. Like, I literally was clueless. And I started talking to some colleagues at the Big Four, and they weren't going to touch it. It's federally illegal. And there's
Right.
just so many other aspects about the emerging industry. There were no proper VCs funding any cannabis deal. So the Big Four are like, why are we going to risk our reputation and our services on an industry that's A, immature, B, doesn't have the right capital behind it, and then the management team might not have the depth and the related experience to actually pull through and survive a few years. You follow?
Oh yeah.
So I dove in feet first, went to conferences. I gained notoriety. I won Best Accountant at the California Cannabis Awards and continued my path forward. So I've been on TV, been on different blogs and podcasts, and I love to share my knowledge, even to my peer group. I have other accountants asking me how they can get in, and I'm happy to share it. I think that there's actually a lack of CPAs in California when you look at the total population. I mean, for every one CPA, there's like 100,000 people. Okay. So
Yeah.
if you think about that number, right, just think about that. If you think of the quantity of active licensed CPAs and the total population in California, that's a huge delta. So I think like, hey, I have nothing. We're actually not competitors. We're trying to slice and dice who we want to work with at this point. You know what I mean?
Oh
Like,
yeah.
I don't worry about that. And second, there are personalities, right? So someone's not going to like me. I really don't mind that. And I'd rather help someone else's career in getting into it. They have the technical accounting knowledge. They don't have the industry expertise. And I told them exactly everything I did. I read a ton of books. Every time I worked out, I had a ton of videos. There were certain YouTube channels I would view. And that's how I gained my industry knowledge, right? It's just going back to basics to get into this career of accounting with cannabis clients. So that's the long story, long and short of it, of how I got in my career and how I got into cannabis.
Well, that is, like you said, I lobbed you up a softball and you knocked it out of the park. Thanks for taking us through that term of experiences there. And, with that vast range of experience within the SEC and all the stuff that cannabis was lacking before, and you're, now few years stint into cannabis, within the specialties you developed, within the experiences you've had in traditional businesses, what do you see? What are the two biggest areas of growth, or what do you think are two big points for the cannabis industry to pay attention to as they're starting to hire on people like yourself, or CPA firms, or internal account management and that kind of stuff? What are some things along the way that you've identified cannabis needs dearly right now?
Yeah, that's such a great question. I see it in two areas. Let's just take ancillary businesses to the cannabis industry. Okay, so when I think about things that support services or goods that support cannabis, I think about technology first. And I know a lot of people think about maybe more the on-site presence of security or what have you, but really I think about technology. There's a lot of great IT service providers that may not have, let's say, a cannabis experience of securing a facility, but they've secured other facilities, right? I think that the difference when you're finding service providers, and I'm just taking security as one aspect with technology, what you're really looking for is what's the return on investment to eliminate human error, right? Does that provider have the mindset of, you know, offsite, you know, in the cloud data storage that you set it and you forget it, you follow? Do they have the technology so that whenever there's, let's say, a movement that is not within the parameters of a typical movement, is the technology sophisticated enough to, let's say, maybe do a zoom, use a camera and zoom in, right, to record? Similar to the technology we're actually used to with Ring. You know, we have those amazing video doorbells, and they've gotten down to the science of like when something really is a movement of a human being versus traffic, right? A car.
Right.
So I think through, you know, different service providers for cannabis companies. And if you're one of those ancillary businesses, and it could be insurance, it could be, the technology insurance is, sharing best practices of how clients who've had certain policies met the obligation within their contract, right? Leveraging technology or software products that maybe could help them justify a claim. You follow? So,
Yep.
once you sell it, you think, oh, well, set it, forget it. They'll just renew every year. But if you're not sharing that type of best practices, that could actually cut some of the costs. That's a huge issue. And in accounting, the future of accounting as a career for those people who are trying to get into it for the cannabis industry, selling your technology is probably one of the best aspects of accounting, because we are going through a revolution of automation of data. So it used to be bookkeepers would type in data. There's pieces of technology that do that for you, right? So what you're asking your accountant is like, how fast can I expect the books to be hard closed, right? So the mega trend is 10 days, and people are trying to push it down to 5 days after the month end. So that way people can start working on reporting, analytics, et cetera. And that's kind of the way I see ancillary businesses, is leveraging technology to do what their bread and butter faster, more efficiently, but then adding value with key performance indicators. Now, in the cannabis industry, I think there's a boom for delivery, right? Delivery drivers. I think the interview process, though, is maybe not as sufficient as possible. So I've worked with many brands and different retailers, and the biggest gross margin products are, white label type products. And in delivery, you're allowed in California to have a few $1,000s worth of unclaimed product in your car, similar to like the ice cream truck model, right? You've got stuff in your vehicle that hasn't been placed for quote unquote an order. And in the interview process for delivery companies is ask the prospective driver to pitch you how they're going to sell a white label product that's on special, right? Like, what's their pitch? And if you see that they're able to feel confident in what they're providing in the pitch, and if you think that you can teach them, let's say, a scripted pitch that works, you're going to be leaps and bounds ahead of your competitors, because most of the competition is taking for granted that maybe, let's say, past performance, they were at ease, or they worked for ease, therefore they must be good, right? But asking them, like, how much product did you sell that wasn't claimed to the same customer that you were delivering to, right? You're already there, right? So that would be a better interview question to see if that career path for that delivery driver is there. The second thing I think in the industry to get really great top talent is providing them, while they're going through their career in delivery, some type of added benefit, right? Is it healthcare? And if it's not healthcare, is it vacation days? We are all moving towards that. That's the mega trend right now, is adding benefits, not taking away benefits. The
Right.
third type of benefit is a pooled bonus. Okay. If the team does great and you set the bar high enough, right? And the team does great for their entire shift, let's all of us share on some of the proceeds of that elevated bonus, right? That elevated revenue. So if the goal was, I'm throwing out a hypothetical number like 10 grand a week or 10 grand a day, whatever that is, and you guys hit 11 grand, okay, we're going to have a pool of commission or bonus out to the group, you know, for that extra, you know, is it $50? Is it $200? Whatever. Your accountant should help you determine that, because what I found is trying to do it on gross profit is nearly impossible and very cumbersome. But you know, allowing them, not only do they get the tips, but we're a team, getting that mentality that, you know, they're part of something bigger than themselves, right? That if the team does well, everybody does well, right? So I think there's some wonderful opportunities in the delivery. Not only do we need more delivery, COVID, and you know, even some of these, let's face it, these fires in California, Oregon's going through this, delivery is going to have this huge boom. But I would be very cautious if I was a retailer about how I'm interviewing and what really is a key performance indicator that you want to see in that driver before you hire them. And I'll say it again, like checking references. I've told plenty of clients, don't underestimate calling references. And even if, let's say they've been to 2 other companies before they're trying to come to your company, that company before the one that they're about to leave, let's say they're currently employed at a company, but the one that they left before that one, that's the one you want to call, right? I kind of feel like I do the same thing. There's nothing stopping me from making an outbound call to check somebody's references at the company. Yeah, we might be competitors, but still, as a professional courtesy, what's the worst that's going to happen to me if I call them about their delivery experience, you know, using that person, right? They could just say, I'm not going to tell you, but okay, fine. Would you rehire them? And they say, absolutely not. Okay, well, that's a good key indicator that maybe there's something
Right.
more to that candidate than meets the eye. So please don't be shy about getting a hang up from your competition, because at least you can sleep well at night thinking that you've done everything possible to do the best vetting process for the right, for your candidates that are going to be in delivery or any other type of career that you're trying to, you know, interview people for.
Yeah, makes sense. And you know, it's prior to this, we've had limited options, even prior to the last 3 years, and the more legal market structure. It's been a whole different game of being an employee and being an employer. So nowadays, I'm deploying more traditional methods and methodologies behind finding the right fit, not only as an employee, finding the right fit, you know, for through the company you're looking for, but as a company, finding the right metric to identify the right employee coming in based upon, hey, we do need the right people to help support this industry and support the structure of these growing and fledgling companies.
Yeah, let me give you another great advice I got from a great friend of mine from high school, and I still continue to talk to this guy on a regular basis. And um, he taught me a trick of not being afraid of hiring somebody outside of my industry, right? So let's say I have a job posting and I want like a staff accountant or what have you. And let's say somebody applies, but they have like no traditional accounting experience, but they came from a very rigid company that had a bunch of processes, a bunch of checklists, a bunch of, you know, activities that were monitored constantly, right? I should interview that person because they came from an organization that is like run like a well-oiled machine. You
Right.
follow? So what are some organizations, big ones? Like there's GE has so many different divisions, but that company is run like a well-oiled machine. For cannabis and the careers in cannabis, so let's say you get an applicant that comes from Enterprise Rent-A-Car, okay? That company is run so tightly, okay? You can't sneeze without somebody knowing about it, okay? So what I'm getting at is in the cannabis industry, as you're looking for candidates, know certain companies in your local area that the bigger corporations, because they have such a great franchise model, right? They've got everything written down in a policy and procedure. So that candidate coming from there, yeah, you're going to take a risk, but it's a calculated risk in that candidate. You know what I mean? They're so used to checking off the box of them completing an activity that that's part of their DNA now. So, I mentioned Enterprise Rent-A-Car. I mean, that would be a perfect candidate. I would still interview for delivery if I was a retail owner, right?
Yeah. Oh, well, it makes sense. And I guess I've referred to it as being corporately groomed, depending upon when you get into that corporate structure, like you said, whether it be an enterprise or GE or any of the traditional larger corporate machines, is that ultimately you at one point did have to check all those boxes and you're groomed a certain way rather than coming up and, let's say, a salesman past or doing that type of thing where it's a bit more haphazard and depending upon how hungry you are. So completely
Mhm.
know what you mean. That's a great point.
Yeah. And there's another key interview question I try to tell my clients to consider, and I use it, is give me a time where you were asked to do something and you weren't given the resources or you lacked some of the resources to complete that task. That one question gives you two insights. One, their problem solving skills and like how do they solve something impromptu, right? And number two, how badly they talk about their employer,
Right.
right?
Right.
And so nobody wants to have a team member that talks crap about the boss, right? Because it's a cancer, right? Because if this person starts talking about like it's all their fault and can you believe this happened to me? I'm a victim and this guy's a jerk or woman's a jerk, that's why I wanted to leave, that's why I'm interviewing here because of, them, boom, key question, not a good person. They're going to be eating at your organization and probably getting other people to think like them, right? So critical question, I think, in the beginning stages of an interview is figuring out problem solving, but then what's their reaction whenever they do get a lack of resources? How do they solve that communication, issue with their employer?
Right. Blame versus solutions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, no, that fantastic insights again, and for this episode, I know a lot of industry professionals from cannabis are listening in, and they're part of our audience here, so I know they'll find this insightful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us today. Over at Aviva Spectrum, I hear you're growing as well, and there are a potential couple job openings over there. What are they, and where might people that are interested find a little bit more information about that?
Yeah, thank you for allowing us to kind of pitch some of our openings. We are hiring. We have two openings, and they deal with our two main lines of service. One is the internal audit side, and we're looking for people that have just general internal auditing experience. So that would be publicly traded publicly traded companies that had internal auditors, or those that are in accounting firms. Another line of service is the cannabis accounting. We have a couple of openings and we're looking for more staff and maybe people who have experience being a controller. We offer in the cannabis industry a lot of like accounting cleanup. We get called in when the numbers are splattered all over the place. The investors don't really have a great sense of what's really happening in the business, and we're called upon to clean that up. So we need a lot of people that are patient, observant, and don't mind digging into the details. What I think is unique that we offer, I think in our firm versus any other CPA firm, we are such a big advocate about helping our candidates, our people, to elevate their personal brand on LinkedIn and other outlets, right? And the reason why I think that that's important, and I've stated this over and over again to different candidates, is once you leave Aviva Spectrum, I don't want you to ever say, I never knew how to take advantage of how to elevate my, one is expertise, and two, to prove to the marketplace that I was good at my job while I was here, right? So getting a LinkedIn written recommendation is a key goal in the first, 12 months with us, right? It's got to happen. There's no reason why at this day and age we can't get you a written recommendation for regardless of what line job posting we have for internal audit services or the cannabis side. And I think people wonder like, wow, okay, you know what? Now this organization is dealing with me. And remember that written recommendation goes with them, right? It doesn't go to me, Sonia Luna. It goes to that individual. So it's a different take on working at a CPA firm. I think some CPA firms kind of understand social media is out there and they have policies, but they're very restrictive, what you can't do, right?
Right.
Our philosophy isn't so much, I just say follow the rules of whatever the platform is, and you're an accountant, for God's sake. You should be acting appropriately. But more importantly, how are you going to convince our clients that they should write you a written recommendation, right? So now the pressure is off of me, right, to monitor that goal. It's really them and how they're servicing the client. So if they do an average job, they might not get it, right? But it has very little to do with me constantly monitoring their weekly or daily performance, because the goal's been out there and we check in on a very regular basis to see how that's going.
Perfect. And that sounds like a great way to create efficiencies and proficiencies within the people that you're working with and have working for you.
Yeah, and they can find our openings on LinkedIn or Indeed. Those are our two places that we put our job postings.
Fantastic. And we'll also have the link in the bio or whatever platform that this is playing on or wherever they're listening to. And Sonia Luna, thank you so much for joining us today.
Thank you again for having me on your show.
My pleasure. Have a great one. You can follow our series, Careers in Cannabis, as well as more great shows like this one at TRICHOMES.com. If you're a member of the cannabis community and you have a story you want to share with us, reach out. You can reach the show at careersincannabis@TRICHOMES.com. Please take a second to subscribe to the podcast and write a review. It really helps others find the show. For TRICHOMES.com, I'm Jarod Duggins. Be well, and thank you for listening.